morning, Townsville. Fair enough, obviously. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Lenihan. I am the branch manager of the Australasian College of Health Service Management. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting this morning.
Remote science.
And pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Also, just a friendly reminder to please turn your mobile phones, pagers, carrier pigeons to silent, please.
Hello, remote science.
Although you are encouraged to use social media throughout using the hashtag ACHSM or at ACHSM on Twitter and Facebook. All right. So I am really genuinely delighted to come up to Townsville. As those that are familiar with the college will normally see lots and lots of things going on down in southeast Queensland, but as I'm regularly told by people up here, Queensland is not southeast Queensland. So it's great to be here and fill an auditorium with like-minded professionals. And I would like to acknowledge and pay a warm welcome to those joining us via webcast. We've got about 40 people joining us via the webcast this morning as well. So hello to everyone online. You are muted at the moment, but when we open up for Q&A, we'll remove that for you. And also I'd like to acknowledge our regular supporters from Hester and QUT, again, who are joining us online. There are some materials at the front for those that haven't picked up any on the way in. And also thank you to the team at Townsville for promoting this event to the extent that we were able to fill the auditorium. So in particular, Sharon Kelly and her team, as well as Neil Rollison for setting up the AV and getting everything running smoothly, fingers crossed. And then Narelle Baker and our interns, Nicole, Olivia and Kate. So I can see at the back, hello. All right. So the ACHSM is a member-based organisation and a peak professional body for health leaders and managers in Australasia. And the ACHSM has a very simple vision, as you'll see: better leadership, healthier communities. So at a state level, I'm striving to improve regional engagement, evidenced by the number of activities held outside of Brisbane in 2018, as well as regular webcasts to support our members in regional communities. So this morning, for example, we have individuals and groups joining us from Cairns, Mount Isa and Longreach. And undoubtedly there's growing activity in Queensland too, but this also coincides with activities that the college is undertaking at a national and regional level too. So we've got information sharing and knowledge and networks ever growing across the region, with recent expansions and partnerships in China, India and the PNG, demonstrating the college's mission to recognise, support, develop effective health leadership and management to support the delivery of quality services and improve health and well-being in our communities. All right, so on to this morning's event, so I won't run any longer. So we do have Dr. Adrian Nowitzki. I won't give too much away. You can read his bio online, and dare say he's familiar to a lot of you here anyway. And he's got more letters after his name than I've got in the entirety of my name. So Dr. Adrian Nowitzki today is presenting a unique perspective on clinical leadership and leadership in clinical services. And he provides this based on a diversified career over 3 decades in healthcare. His experience includes Director of Neurosurgery, Chief Executive Officer, Major Project Owner, Consultant and Executive Leadership Coach. And as I mentioned, locally you'll know Adrian in his capacity as part-time Medical Director to the Surgical Services Group at Townsville Hospital. So without further ado, if you could please join me in welcoming Dr. Adrian Nowitzki.
Thank you very much, Adam. What a wonderful privilege. It's fantastic to be here. It's wonderful to be here. And I thank you very much. In Brisbane, when these functions are held, mostly they're associated with a breakfast. Mostly it's paid for by some part of Queensland Health, and so most people are coming along for a free feed. Whereas you guys here locally are not, and those people on the web certainly didn't have a free feed. So thank you very much. It's a real privilege. I too would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and their elders, past and present and emerging. We have no doubt that those traditional owners sat on the Ross River here in Townsville and told stories. Clinical leadership is very much about telling stories. It's about understanding where you want to go. It's about understanding your environment and putting it into a language that people can identify with. and that's storytelling. And so very much our traditional owners are very much a part of the story today. And so I'd like to start with a story, but before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge our Chief Executive, Kieran. And I'd also like to acknowledge Judy, who looks after my diary here in Townsville. And I think I've given her a stroke and a heart attack all in one this year. And I thank you very much, Judy, for what you do, for looking after me. In 1995, I had the privilege of being a young PHO with stars in my eyes. Wanted to become a brain surgeon, and got an opportunity to move to Townsville. Sat over in the old Sheraton, as it was in those days, looking out at the shipping lane going out towards Magnetic Island, drinking a white wine, I think, and just couldn't help but be fascinated at night time by the green and red lights just going out into the ocean. A fantastic metaphor for what might lie ahead for all of us. Again, that's leadership. And I had a privilege of being well looked after and a wonderful place. And so personally, it's wonderful to be back here, and I'm grateful. What I'm going to share today is some of that story. Who knows what life is going to bring to us? We start on a path and then we end up somewhere else. And I hope that in the next 40 minutes or so that I'm able to share with you some stories that have illuminated my journey of leadership. And I very much hope that they have relevance for you. The reason is that one of the great things about healthcare is that we are here, by and large, to look after people. And those of us in public healthcare have an enormous social desire. Yes, we know that working for Queensland Health carries certainty of employment. We know that as a doctor you get plenty of PDL and you get paid well, etc., etc. But you also get to look after the most vulnerable people in our society. We get to look after people who are sick, who are frankly powerless. And that's a great privilege. And so having been often worked at one stage for Telstra as a large corporate, I can tell you that one of the great things about what we do in healthcare is that we focus on our patients, and so that's what unites us. But the real question is, how on earth do we deliver the best of care in a system for our community? And today I'm going to bang on endlessly about leadership. And the title here is it soft skills or is it frankly too hard? Is dealing with people just too hard? I'm going to ignore it and I'm going to become a manager. I'm going to become a process person. I can deal with process. I can understand an HR policy. People, they're a completely different kettle of fish. And my journey really started at the very end of my neurosurgery training. I'd trained for the years that you do. I got onto the program from here. I then went into 4 years of training with the College of Surgeons to become technically competent to do brain surgery. That was my entire 4 years of training. Learning books, learning knowledge, understanding pathology, anatomy, technical skills with my hands, hopefully an ability to interact with patients, but most importantly, to be able to do an operation on the right person at the right time. And I was in my final year of training and I was about to become a fellow in a unit. And in that unit, we were going to have 2 trainee registrars. Now, this is 1999, and we were just starting to see this emergence. And what happened was that those 2 training registrars, both of whom had come from that unit in the past and had gone away to other cities and then were coming back, both refused to come and join us. They both said, that place is toxic. We're not going to go there. We don't want to be treated like that. We don't want to be a part of that. And back in those days, as a registrar, you did what you were told by the College of Surgeons. So it was gutsy. And here was a move that I had never seen before. Because I'd been taught that what you had to be was a good technical surgeon. Now I had people raising the issue of patient safety and their own personal safety. We're not coming. And that was the beginning of my journey on leadership. I was lucky thereafter to become the director of that unit in the October thereafter. And here is some of our story. So what we're going to talk about today is firstly we're going to ask this question of, is leadership important? Because that's where that soft skills things come in. You know, people said to me, you're gone off to the dark side. Why would you do an MBA? You know, what do you do with all of that stuff? Being a good surgeon, being a professor of neurosurgery, that's the answer. So is this stuff that I'm going to talk about all nice and airy-fairy and woolly and kumbaya and let's all go around the totem pole? We've heard it all. Or is it actually hard? Does it actually make a difference? So that's where I'm going to start. And then I'm going to go through and say, you know what? Having demonstrated that it is important, we as clinical leaders are ill-equipped because of our training to work in this space. And then we're going to just explore a couple of models. We have a framework which is a very simple framework of leadership. It's firstly, understand your environment. Actually understand what's happening. When someone says to you, I'll probably use the word doctor because that's my usual practice now, right? He'll go, that doctor's a bad person. They usually don't say that. They say they're lazy, they're slack, they're difficult, they're troublesome, they're bothersome. The response is to go, right, I've framed you. I know you're a bad person. Understand that person. Take some time. Understand where they've come from. Understand what's floating their boat. They may well be a pain in the arse, right? They may well be someone who needs help. They also might be just misunderstood. They might be a round peg in a square hole. So then understand then the knowledge. And we're going to talk about some models. And in leadership practice, of course, we talk about models to try and understand the world. I would implore you to explore some models. I've chosen some that are really relevant to clinical practice. There are many, but explore them, right? Understand, and it will help you to understand yourself. And then finally, we will then talk about applying that. So you take a model, how does that apply to what we're doing? And I'm going to try and do some of that today. The other problem with leadership is that leadership is all about me. Leadership is all about you. When I started my leadership studies at QUT in my MBA, I thought this is fantastic. Because you see, I went into the MBA with a surgeon's mindset. They will teach me how to be a leader. So all I have to do is study Mandela, maybe study other great leaders. We'll have a bit of a conversation about whether Hitler was a good leader or an effective leader. But by and large, you know, Churchill, all of those people, let's just roll them out, John F. Kennedy, da-da-da. I will learn the skill of Mandela. As long as I can pick up some of those technical skills, I will be a good leader. And the lecturer said, leadership is all about you. And this is all about you looking inside yourself. Shit. I don't want to do that. It's too hard. And let's understand that in our clinical practice, and particularly as senior doctors, my job as a doctor is to tell everybody else what to do. My job is not to ask questions of people about me and my qualities. My job is for them to accept that I'm pretty good and they're lucky to have me here. And so leadership is very much a journey inside ourselves where we go, strip it all away. I'm a human being. I might carry an authority. I'm a human being. Leadership is about me. Leadership is about my behaviour, my response to others, and it's really scary. So firstly, let's get on and ask this question about, is leadership actually important? And I love this slide. I love this slide, right? So knowledge is knowing that a tomato is actually a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it into a fruit salad. And leadership is about wisdom. You've got to have the knowledge, but you won't become a leader without wisdom. You will simply be a manager. And we will refer back between leadership and management. I'm not down on management. Management is super important. Absolutely. We're now talking about leadership. So this is the key question, right? A number of years ago when Liam Donaldson was the Chief Medical Officer of the NHS, he came to Queensland and he gave a number of talks and he said this. He said, we used to think that to deliver good patient care, all we needed was well-trained staff, good physical hospitals and good systems. And most of us would believe that. How do we make a better healthcare system in Queensland? We rebuild our hospitals, we train our staff and we have good staff. He said, we now know that that is not enough. And I put it to you that if your mum is going to have an operation, let's say something as simple as a hip replacement, you're living in a metropolitan city where you've got two choices. You've got a number of choices of hospitals to go to. One hospital has got the great doctors, but they hate each other. They don't work well. The nurses don't talk to each other. There's no teamwork. The physio comes in and gets a handover from the nurse because they don't know what's happening with the doctor, etc. And you've got another hospital over here where the doctors they're good, right? They don't have the name, they're good, but people work together. There is harmony, there is teamwork, there is collaboration. I ask you, which hospital are you going to put your mum in? For most of us, it will be the second one. And to me, that should be enough of an argument about leadership. But let's go a bit further. So Ernest Codman was a doctor in the early 1900s in Boston. He's really the father of audit. All of this stuff that we do in audit and morbidity and mortality, Ernest Codman was the man. Now, Codman didn't have leadership skills, unfortunately, apparently. In this slide, this is a cartoon that Codman himself drew. He was saying to the Boston Medical Association a very radical concept. You know what, guys? We should actually follow our patients, measure their outcomes to see if we are actually doing any good. And if we're not doing good, we should actually stop what we're doing. Nowadays, we go, of course. Back then, absolute heresy. What do you mean? I am God, I am a doctor, I am obviously doing good. So his way of telling them to wake up was to do this cartoon, and he drew that. You know, the ostrich that's got its head in the sand, and then there's a golden egg, it's called money. And you guys, my colleagues, you've got your head in the sand, you don't want to address the fact you're making heaps of money, and, you know, this is all terrible. They threw him out. Right? They threw him out of the Boston Medical Association. We now hail him as a hero. So the story of Codman is that it's not just enough to have a good idea, right? And I'm thinking of Kieran, he's going to be going, yes, you need to learn this. And it's a constant journey. It's not enough to have a good idea. You need to be excellent at bringing people with you on the journey. And that's the story of Codman. We know that people join organisations. So on the left-hand side, these are people who are dissatisfied with their direct manager and they want to leave. On the right-hand side, people who are happy with their manager and they want to stay. We join organisations because we see an opportunity for us. Then we encounter people. And so those of us who are in leadership positions and got direct reports, and that's probably everybody on this call, this is us. Already we have a response. It's not them. Let's look at us first. That's leadership. In nursing units, in wards, managers' skills are the largest determinants of unit performance. And what we do in nursing typically is we say, you're a pretty good clinical nurse. Would you like to be the nurse unit manager? They are completely different jobs. They're completely different jobs. We're addressing that. But the point here is that management matters. Leadership matters. Whether we get our cannulas out in time is not just about a policy. It's about leadership. And it's leadership of people. Peter Senge said this. He said, people aren't resistant to change. They're resistant to being changed. But as a leader, you have to drive change. You have no choice. Because unless you do, you are overseeing stagnation. Unfortunately, life must move on. We must create change. So, it's often been said that human beings, that no human being likes change except a baby with a wet nappy, and then only sometimes. So this is a leadership skill that we need to deliver. This is pretty sensitive for us here in Townsville, but here is an example, right, where a very Townsville conversation about the use of sustained release opioids and all of the problems that created for us locally ultimately ends up in a publication by the College of Anaesthetists about what to do. And there are years of turbulence. One would think that if the College of Anaesthetists says it's a good idea, it'd be a pretty straightforward passage, right? It ain't. And that's leadership. And this is the real one. This is the hard one. For those that are into finance and hard numbers, this is the science. So in this thing called the leadership circle, which I'll talk about a lot today, you measure leadership effectiveness. And here are the questions about that people respond to about being a leader. what we see in a study of 2,000 businesses is that business performance is correlated mostly with leadership effectiveness. And we can look at that and go, yeah, that's all private sector. Well, it isn't. Revenue growth, we need money, right, to provide services. Market share, do people want to come and buy your services? Are our patients happy with us? Profitability, we actually need to spend our money wisely. Right? We can't waste money, it's the public's money. Quality of care, no more said. Innovation, no more said. Overall performance. And of all of the things that we must do in an organisation, have good policies, good procedures, good structures, etc., the one that makes the difference is leadership effectiveness. Effectiveness of the leaders. Now, don't be looking at your CEO and go, well, he or she had better do a good job. Because leadership is at all levels. If you are the team leader of the cleaning service, you are critical to our infection rates. If you are the team leader of the kitchen, you are critical to the nutrition of our patients and therefore directly to the outcomes of their care. So don't be thinking that this is about someone up there. This is about me. This is about us. This is about anybody who leads a team. Pardon me. Have I convinced you enough that it's important? Let's now start to get into a couple of these matrices. What I'm going to do in this next slide is to go, oh, well, that's nice, but we're talking about clinical leadership. We're not talking about administration. They apply equally. So Ralph Stacey put out this matrix between agreement and certainty. And he said, if you look at a matrix, you can see that there is high agreement about what needs to be done, or the people are a long way away from what needs to be done. We can have certainty about what will happen if we do something, or we can have no certainty about what will happen if we do something. When we operate in this bottom box, where everybody agrees what should be done, and we all know what will happen when we do it, then that's easy, right? When you've got a group of people in your workplace who all love going to a place for Friday afternoon drinks, by and large, you say, guys, let's go there for Friday afternoon drinks, you're a winner, right? It's pretty straightforward, you're on a winner. Up in the top right is chaos, where there is low certainty and low agreement, and that's absolutely where you do not want to be. And the leaders of all organisations must not take people there. However, in the middle, we then get a spectrum, right, where the care is complicated. So in simple, that's where junior staff operate. That's where residents, registrars, junior nurses operate in that simple space. And then when it's a bit more complicated, that's when we call in the boss, because it's their job to work out, because we're not quite sure what we should do. That's complicated, and that's why we do our training. Up in the left there with complicated, between where there is less agreement but there's plenty of certainty, that's politics. That's a negotiation. We're not really sure what we should do, but we know what we want to do, and that's politics. We take another step out, and that's complex. That's the world we actually operate in mostly, is that complex world. So our leadership needs to grow to deal with the challenges that we're seeing. To put it another way, the Stacey model is like this. Management is the bottom left. That's our comfort zone. That's our safe place. Let's do a board paper. Let's write an agenda. Let's do an analysis. Nothing wrong with it. That's our safe place. As we get more complex, that's leadership. So my point here is that just in clinical practice, we become better at what we do so we can take on the complicated cases. As leaders, we need to develop our leadership to go up there. To put it another way, when we operate in that bottom left space, we are in the same space, and it is same. We don't progress, we don't change things very much. If we believe that we owe our community innovation, development, and progress, we have to operate in that complicated/complex space. And that requires leadership skills. Unfortunately, our training does not fit for purpose. So how many of us, and I'm sorry for those on the webinar, you can put your hand up, I can't see, but feel free to join in. In the room, how many of us have postgraduate degrees, have a university degree in clinical practice? Just about all of us. How many of us have a university degree in leadership? About 10%. Our model as a clinician is teach me what I need to know. I see the pattern recognition. I've seen that before. I know what to do about it, and I can do something about it. For those of you that have done an MBA, you realise the very first lesson of an MBA is the answer to everything is it depends. Even in the law, it depends. And so we've got this vagary. So our mindset is, give me a cookbook, teach me how to do this stuff. Oh my God, it depends. Because hospitals are a complex adaptive system featuring people. Complex, many parts, all interacting. No one person can understand it. No one person can describe it. All of those parts influencing each other. The system is doing its thing. No one is in control. No one is in control. Adaptive because it changes. And it seems to change from day to day, and it does its own changing. And things that created a problem or a certain response yesterday just go by today because life has changed. And they are a system. And of course, featuring people. Leadership is all about people. It's about us. What we bring to work is us as people with all of our fallibilities. And the business literature has termed this language a VUCA world. So what we know is that in healthcare, if we look back to 1995 when I was a little PHO with stars in my eyes, you think back 20 years ago, the world is now more volatile. It is now more uncertain. It is now more complex, and it is much more ambiguous. Our leadership practice must evolve to keep up with a VUCA world. This is only going to keep going. So we start to develop some of the qualities that I, as a clinical leader, need to become. And one of them is that I need to become a dichotomous leader. A lot of medicine, a lot of clinical care is about right and wrong. What's the right answer? Dichotomy, leadership, is about holding opposites at the same time. And leaders who are underdeveloped hold a single view and they will not see anybody else's view. Is climate change real? Does anyone actually know? But we hold a view. Some people are way down the absolutely, and we will just do whatever needs to be done. Some people are down the other end, it's not, and we'll do whatever needs to be done. Leaders need to hold a dichotomous view. People bring to work different views of life. Who would have ever thought that my colleague, Brian Owler, a neurosurgeon in Sydney and former AMA president, was actually a Labor Party guy, right? Who would have ever thought that? But there you go. And this is hard to hold dichotomy, but you have to. And this is about our own personal development. You see, because resistance or momentum are neither good nor bad. I remember when I started on the Gold Coast, I got word from head office. That person in your executive team is a black hat. They are bad, right? They're a negative, they're a downsayer. The problem was that we actually put that person in the wrong space. So when I'm doing what I do and what I love doing, which is problem solving, get excited, waving my arms around, and we're going to create greatness and we're going to change the future, there she or he is going, Jesus. Right? What I need to do is say, hey, dude, I can't use you in this space. Your skill is to keep me out of trouble. When I've decided what I think we should do, you tell me how I'm going to mess up. You keep my backside safe. Right? So resistance and momentum are neither good nor bad. But momentum without resistance is recklessness. Resistance without momentum is stagnation. And we as leaders have to hold these ourselves. And here are another couple of examples of things that we need to hold at the same time. And often in clinical care, there are times when you need to put a cloak on where you walk in and go, right, this is what we are doing. Right? There's a person there, they're not breathing, their heart has stopped, they are going to die. It's not the time to be going, okay, guys, let's do a whiteboarding session and work out how we think we should be going about here. Right? It's a time to walk in there and go, right, you do that, you do that, you do that. I'm the boss, this is what we're doing. You've got to know when to take that cloak off and to go into another place. Another thing that we often do as leaders is we often talk about problems. And I want to give this to you as a concept because it helps VUCA. Problems have an answer. Polarities do not. There is no right way. Pardon me. Most of what we deal with in leadership is a polarity. And if you are stuck in a right and wrong way, then you're not going very far. For example, should HR practice be centralised into an HR division, or should HR practitioners be engaged in their frontline division services, in our case, our surgical services, or anywhere else? What's the right model? The answer is, there isn't one. Make a choice and do the best with it. I make some money as a consultant telling people to go to the other choice because they think there's a right answer. So, Adrian, tell us the right answer. It's always the opposite of what you're actually doing now. Then, if you're lucky, you get a bit of an implementation phase, but I digress. So, Sengi talks about the mind as a filter, and this is a classic, right? This is a really difficult one. What Sengi is saying here is that, you get so much information coming in all the time at you. You cannot process it. You can't cope with it. And so what you do is you have a filter, unconscious, and I see the world as it is so I can make sense of the world. So if you're in political world, for example, if you don't like Malcolm Turnbull, then your filter is he's a bad guy. And everything you read about the Libs, getting rid of him as Prime Minister was spot on. If you love Malcolm Turnbull and you think he's a good guy and you're more on the left of the centre politics, then you will say they're terrible. And it's easy to do that. And that's what commentators do. But we can't do that. We make sense of the world. We see people outside doing something and immediately I know exactly what's happening. That's clinical care. In the outpatients, I've got 20 minutes, half an hour maybe. Someone comes in, I'm going to tell you exactly what's wrong. I know it, I've seen it before, right? That's not our care. That's not us. Is that person terrible? Are they annoying? Do we need to do something different? Remember that we don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. We bring our biases to work. We bring our view of the world. And for those of us that are shallow, my view is right. But then we have to develop this self-awareness that says, if I spend all my day questioning myself, I will become depressed and I'll have little self-confidence. If I spend my day thinking I'm right, then I'll become arrogant. I need to find a place in the middle. So remember that filter and always ask yourself what's happening there. Chris Argyris took this on a step further and he talked about a ladder. And the ladder basically starts with the filter. And what Chris Argyris said is that we start with reality and facts. And remember that I said I implored us at the start to find more reality, to understand the environment around you. And then we take that selected reality. I'll see what I want to see and I'll ignore what I don't want to see. A great example of that this morning. Sorry, Judy, you don't know about this yet. This is my way of saying Judy. Thank you. In my head, I'm on the 7:55 flight to Brisbane tonight, in my head. And I know what I'm going to do at 5:30 this afternoon. I've already got a plan. Well, guess what? My wife on the phone this afternoon said, are you having dinner at home or are you on the plane? I said, hey, I'm not getting home till 10 o'clock. She goes, yes, you are. You're on the 4:50 plane. I had wiped out everything else because I knew that I was on the 7:55 plane. Okay? And that's that selected reality. It gets in there, stuck in there, done. Don't question it ever again. Right? Thank God for my wife. I've done it before, by the way. And then we make our assumptions and our conclusions and our beliefs and our actions. I know what's right, and that's what I believe. And that's the way to deal with it, and then I become an action. And so we then slip up this ladder really quickly. I see something in clinical leadership, and I run up my ladder because I know exactly what's happening. All the time I'm processing it through my beliefs, my filters, and I did not stop to question it. And our beliefs then come down to the data we select. So I will look for information that supports my belief because it's comfortable for me. Please don't tell me I could be wrong. So I will seek out information and I will tell myself that that information exists. But beware of delicious self-delusion. I know I'm right. That's my beliefs. They are right. And I exclude anything else and anyone else that might be different from me. We are tribal. We hang around with people like us. Why do you think we have the Neurosurgery Society of Australasia? So that people like me, well, I'm not really like them, but anyway, I try to be. People like me can hang around together and talk about stuff that we like talking about. Bowls clubs, kindies, churches, whatever. We're tribal people. Beliefs can't change facts, but facts should change our beliefs. We should be constantly testing our beliefs and assumptions because they underpin our actions, and they do it subconsciously. And here is an example. Those damn doctors don't respond to their work emails in a reasonable time. Right? The meaning is that when people don't respond to their emails, it means they're not interested. It could be, but there might be other reasons. The assumption is that people who aren't interested are unlikely to be engaged, so therefore, why bother? It might be true, but it might be wrong. And it might lead you down a path of not engaging with people that you could and should engage with if you held a different belief about them and their work. So let's then go on to a bit of neuroanatomy. Let's talk about our two brains. Remember that we have a limbic system in red. It's our base. It's the part of our brain that we share with every animal. It is the thing to eat, drink, reproduce, and fight those who will stop me doing any of the previous actions. That's my limbic system. It's my amygdala, it's my hippocampus, it's all of those things. And over the top is my cerebral cortex. That's my thinking brain. Our limbic system sends us subconscious messages all the time. You're no good. You can't do it. You're out of your depth. You're fantastic. You're great. That person's a dickhead. Right? All of these things come from our limbic system and they come up. So the behaviourist psychologists would tell us that there is an event. And we see that event, and by and large we see a reaction, a response, and sure, we pop it around our emotion, our behaviour, but we then have a result. That's the clinical mindset. I've seen this before, I know exactly what's going to happen. That person did that because the outcome will be that, therefore the intervention needs to be. And that's Pavlov, right? That's Pavlov's dog. No, that's me in the Qantas Club. Where's the bar? The problem is that we know that the same event does not always create the same result. You go on holidays, you come back, you're chilled. Someone says the same thing to you the day you come back from holidays that they said to you the day before you went on holidays, different response. Yeah? And so there's got to be more to it than just this pure Pavlov dog thing. Cognitive psychology now says that we pass it through our internal operating system and we provide meaning to it. So this logic, like a computer has an internal operating system of saying, I have an internal operating system and I run my program, that is my beliefs, my assumptions, my perspectives. And I run it through there and now I get a result. And so this then leads to what we call the structure of mind. And what we're saying here is the mind, remember that we have our limbic system, which has our automatic stuff, and then we have a mind that's processing stuff in the background all the time. Leadership is about working on your structure of mind. That's what leadership is. Leadership is working on your structure of mind. Here are two structures of mind. The first one's called a problem reacting structure. We have a problem. We often have a fear. Remember the three things that are most powerful in life? Fear, acceptance, and love. And I then respond and I have a reaction. The problem is that this structure of mind is external. It is anxiety provoking. I am constantly reacting to my world around me. It has me. It's managing me. People are giving me problems and I'm solving them. This is clinical care. This is our patients, right? And this is so much of our life as a manager if we let it. Problem, what's the problem of this week? Oh, thank God we got to Friday. And I'm in this cycle of reacting to problems. Then there's this other structure of mind, which is an outcome creating, which says I have a purpose, I have a vision, I have a passion, and that creates my action. This now has an internal locus of control. This is my story. My story is this is where we're going. This is my approach to life. I have it. I'm managing it. I'm in control. I am not at your mercy. I am myself. We are playing to win together, as distinct from we are playing to not lose. Playing to win, playing to not lose. And we've got these two structures of mind. Which one do we operate in? Because the event will pass through our structure of mind and that will determine our outcome. And you can see what happens here. In the problem reacting one, we simply just meet challenges and we go up and down. And that's our circle. And this is a life that most of us in healthcare experience. And on the right-hand side, that's where growth is. That's where generation is. That's where progress is. And I put it to you that because we love our community, that's where we need to be. But it is not a natural state for us. Because as adults, we develop. We're all used to watching our children develop, and we're all excited about that. And then we forget that when we get to where we are, we stop developing. And I struggled, right? I got to 32, I'd been doing exams all my life, and suddenly I'd finished, I'd made it, I was now a neurosurgeon, happy days. Right? Adults develop through our life. And we go through this phase, and we go through this reactive, so-called socialised phase. The socialised phase is I gain my acceptance from others around me. That if you tell me I'm a good person and I do the right thing, I'm spot on. I'm doing what I need to do. 75% of the population is in that phase. Organised politics is about finding where they're at and telling them they're right. And then people say, you are right, I'll vote for you, aka Donald Trump. Right? That's where most of the population are. That's where we are. That's where we start our journey. Leadership is about lifting us into the creative phase, to an independent sphere that says, I'm okay. I'm not arrogant, but you do not determine my emotional response. You do not control my life. I control my life. I'm responsible. I'm responsible for my failings as much as I am responsible and enjoying my benefits. This is the journey of leadership. It does not come naturally, right? It is hard. It is structure of mind stuff. So we look at things like the NHS Leadership Qualities Framework, which we've used in Queensland Health for donkey's ages, and it's a whole pile of good stuff. I'm going to suggest to you a thing called the Leadership Circle. I'm going to skip through it now because I'm running out of time. The Leadership Circle, and put out a disclosure there, I'm a coach with the Leadership Circle and I love this stuff, right? And some of our clinical leaders in surgery are just starting this journey. What it says on the left-hand side is I am a relationship person. On the right-hand side, I'm a task-orientated person. That's where I like to be. On the left-hand side, I like enjoying time with people. On the right-hand side, I can't stand people and I'd rather look at my computer. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with it. Social workers on the left-hand side, accountants and lawyers on the right. Okay? Nothing wrong with it. Neurosurgeons, you can work that out. I am a reactive person. I'm in my reactive phase. Note that there's still leadership qualities. Again, being reactive is not all bad. And I have my creative tendencies at the top. And a leadership profile with the leadership circle will show you where you sit in that space. Problem. My identity is at the core. When I am in a reactive phase, my identity is under attack. And I will react. When I am creative, you're not attacking my identity because I'm cool. Therefore, I am free to not react. I am free to be purposeful and visionary. I am free to be a team player. I am free now to have emotional intelligence. And it's that journey about the identity that is at the heart of leadership. That's why it's so hard. That's why it's so hard. So we've got these reactive styles. Complying means that I want to be liked by people, right? Protecting means that I'm going to protect myself, and I'll do that by pushing you away. And I will be controlling. I make the point again, these are not bad. There are times when you have to be distant. You work in the emergency department, you see a terrible thing. You have to be able to distance yourself from work. You have to be able to let it go. So you have to have these qualities, but not overwhelmingly. And equally, what we do want to do is move ourselves from those reactive qualities up into our creative competencies. And this takes action, and it usually takes coaching. It takes a purposeful movement of reading, thinking, reflecting, etc., to move us up there. And these are the qualities that we want to create. Why? So remember that slide earlier, we talked about leadership effectiveness. We talked about business outcomes. We talked about organisational outcomes related to business effectiveness. Which of these qualities are correlated? Bottom left, being passive. Negative 0.66, negative 1 is a perfect correlation. It says that passive people don't lead. Passive people like to be liked, right? One of my problems is actually pleasing. I'm actually pretty high up because I actually don't like people not liking me, right? I'm more than happy to be purposeful and visionary, but I actually really want people to like me. That's a weakness for me as a person. On the flip side, purposeful and visionary, storytelling, knowing where you're going, being able to stand up for it, not being afraid when people tell you you're an idiot, right? That's leadership. Actually saying to people, listen, old mate, that behaviour is not acceptable. That is leadership. That is purposeful, it's visionary, and it's putting yourself out there to be criticised. And if your identity is weak, then you can't do it. We let it go through to the keeper and we react. Foster team play also. But look at that, 0.91. 0.91, right? Really important. And this is what high-performing organisations look like. They have lots of creative, but they have reactive, because you have to know when to use a hammer and when to use a screwdriver, right? It's not one or the other, coming back to our clinical training. And this is what the literature tells us poor-performing organisations do. So poor-performing organisations have reactive tendencies. This is what we think is the optimal profile. The reason I put this up is simply to say most of us start at reactive. 75% of the population are there. You want to be a leader, you are going to be different. If you can't cope with being different, don't try and be a leader. You want to be in the middle of the pack, stay there, but don't be a leader. Secondly, there are competencies to create. You have to purposefully do it. And thirdly, don't throw everything else out, because you need to know when it's time to be directive, because there are times when we need to do that. And this is my last slide. One of the problems we have in hospitals is that our life is overwhelmingly reactive. Our nurses will go back to the bedside. They will react to the patient. The patient will say, I have something. They will measure a blood pressure. They will react. They have to. That is our life. Kieran will get a phone call from the minister's office via the DG's office. Do this. Stop it. Don't care what else you're doing. Do this. Got to react. Right? We are reactive. Our life is reactive. All day, every day, overwhelmingly. Emails, phone calls, emails. Overwhelmingly reactive. But it's almost impossible to be creative when you are being reactive. So my point then about clinical leadership is this. Firstly, it matters. It very much matters, and it matters to our patient care. Secondly, we're not trained in it. We are beautifully trained to be reactive. We receive almost no training in being leaders. Thirdly, the world is swimming along in a very reactive space. Our hospitals are very reactive spaces, and out of that must emerge leaders. And the only person that's going to get you out of that is you. And it's a journey that starts with, you know what, I'm not where I want to be. I've got a hole in my life as a person and as a leader, and I need to fill it up. And with that, I just want to say thank you so very, very much for the opportunity of being able to share some thoughts. And I'm delighted to take some questions, comments, and criticism. Thank you.
So do we have any questions? We do have microphones.
What we'll do with the questions is that I'll repeat them so the people on the web can understand. That way we won't wait for the microphone to come through. I'll start with the room, and then those on the web can prepare the web off mute.
So he's got an adult phone kidney, so he's still got his two native kids.
All right, Kieran.
Talk this morning. In your current role, you're actually continually required to move between still that clinical paradigm where you have to be reactive by necessity of your role, and then into a leadership paradigm where you have to be more creative. Can you talk a little about how you find yourself switching between those two different mindsets, often in the course of perhaps the same hour?
Thank you. I told her she looks after me. Thank you, Kieran. And I know people could hear that, so I won't repeat it. The answer is I actually don't know why I'm doing it to myself. And I mean that honestly. And part of the reason why I'm doing is, well, apart from the fact that Adrian asked me to do it, and she's a really lovely person, and Eric Watts, a friend of mine, asked me to do it, and he's been my mate for 25 years, so that's a good enough reason, and I need some money. The reason I do it, one of the reasons I do it, is because that's the daily life of our clinical leaders, of our nurse unit managers, our nursing executive, our allied health people, our specialists. We expect them to flip from that mindset into this mindset. We expect them to take their cloak off. And I figured that if I was going to be helpful to people, I'd probably better get back in and start doing it again. And that's why I'm doing it. How do I do it? Well, firstly, I talk to people around me about this stuff. And I want people to be able to say, you are being reactive when you should be creative. I give people permission to tell me that. I give people permission to criticise. Part of that is acknowledging Judy. Judy's very important. Right? She comes into the office, closes the door, and says, you know what, you really didn't do very well there. We need that, right? We all need that. Thirdly, I try and develop a sense of awareness. And then fourthly, I try and look around at those things in my life that make me reactive. My daughter playing up, my wife getting cranky, my wife being unhappy I'm in Townsville when she's in Brisbane, sleep deprived, on call, hungry, what have you. So the way I try and do it is to try and understand what's happening in my life, but I actively do it. And I need to sit back and go, right, now is the time to do A and B. And of course, to, as you and I know, to then say when we don't do it properly, didn't do it properly. And try and build awareness, because what you want to build is awareness that says, I am now doing what I shouldn't be doing, and I need to get rid of Argyris's ladder that tells me I am absolutely right, and I'm just going to go right up there. I think that's how I do it. Thank you. It's a great question. I'm going to need a therapist now. Sir.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. My name's Ralph. I work in Reactive. One of the tools that's really becoming more and more talked about in regards to moving from reactive to creative, carrying dichotomous views, to really going on this journey is mindfulness.
Yes.
A lot of evidence behind it now. I wonder, firstly, what role that's played in your own journey.
Yes.
And secondly, how can we better invest in that all stuff to be able to act loud?
Yeah, good. So the question for those on the web was about mindfulness. And mindfulness is a technique that's now being used to take people from reactive to creative. And how should we invest in it? And was it a part of my journey? I guess it was. I didn't really know. Mindfulness is a term that's really sort of come into vogue of recent times. We used to call it reflection. I guess before that we used to have friends, who would shine a light up to us. And I think the other thing I thought about Kieran's question was to put yourself out there to do something. So the other way that I manage the reactive creative is to force myself to do things, to create an agenda. This forces me up there. I think mindfulness is like that. Mindfulness as a study is excellent, and it's a great technique. It works for some people, it doesn't work for others. The logic of mindfulness is I'm going to go into myself, go into my mind and start to unpack myself and understand myself. And the literature is rich. So as a technique, it is fantastic. It is at the heart of coaching, and and so some people will pick up a book on mindfulness, as people picked up, for example, emotional intelligence, and they thought, this is fantastic and it speaks to me. Mindfulness is like that. It'll speak to some people, it will speak less to others. Should we invest in it? Well, there's two parts of investment. There's personal investment, and then there's investment as a society. Firstly, it depends where you want to be. It depends if we ever sit back and say, what do I want to be in 10 years' time? Or do I sit back and say, who do I want to be in 10 years' time? They're fundamentally different questions. I've gone from a journey of wanting to be something to hopefully now wanting to be a person of a certain style. So we've got to go, this is the person I want to be, and then I might invest in myself. Should we as society invest? Well, look, I actually think we should, of course. And I used to work for Stephen Duckett back in the days of Top 500 and all of that sort of stuff. We spent a lot of money on the Gold Coast investing in leadership because I think we should invest in leadership. Sadly, in organisations, it is the thing that we flick first when we have no money. We keep a whole pile of stuff, but we get rid of leadership because we actually don't think that it's actually valuable. So we actually believe as a society, as Queensland Health, if I can use that word, that training our people to be mindful has much benefit at all. Much better to train them in our mandatory training. And I say that respectfully. Mandatory training is important, don't get me wrong, right? Hand washing is really important. But we really don't invest in our people going from that reactive space to that creative space, and we need them to. But I also get how hard it is to get that money, right? So it's not a criticism. Yeah. That's a really great question. So the question for those online, and I'll next go ask online if someone wants to jump in. The question was, where do you start with changing corporate culture and workplace culture, particularly when you see toxicity? So following my model, The first place you start is understanding it. Understand the people. I got to do an intervention in a maternity unit in another state, in a country area. And the obstetrician and the nurse unit manager were unbelievably like this. Couldn't talk to each other. Absolute hatred. And don't tell me patient care is exemplary, right? Because it won't be. But going in there and understanding him, understanding where he came from, and his background and his army background and moving around, and the fact that he's learnt to not have friends, because why would you have friends? Because your dad moves on because your dad's in the army. So he ain't got any friends. He ain't going to be friends with the num, right? Or the mum, because they ain't got no friends. She, on the other hand, was very left-leaning, very green, very community-minded, right? He was probably autistic, like most of us. Honestly, most of us in advanced clinical care probably are autistic in some way, myself included. And she was very left. And so that's what you've got to unpick. Now, firstly is understand the environment. Secondly is remember the most important thing is visionary and purposeful. Right? Is actually saying what you think it should be. If there is a toxic culture, you have to actually demonstrate an alternative.
You can go left here at the light here if you like.
You live it.
Yeah,
people follow the leader. Right? It's weird. I'm sure Kieran experiences this. When I became the chief executive on the Gold Coast, my first reflection was, how on earth do I as an individual influence 5,000 people? I will never meet them. Well, guess what? Those 5,000 people look at me, don't know me from Barrows Hope, form opinions, but go, well, he's the boss, we'll just do what he says. And do what he does. It's weird, but it happens. So you then have to live it. And you then start on the journey. And you have to have wisdom. But you have to know where you want to go. Right? You can't just say that's bad. You've got to go, this is where we should be. And that's how you start it. And of course, your sphere of influence, of course, changes depending on how much influence you have. But the point is, we can all influence our pocket. We can all be a shining light in our pocket. And lots of shining lights in a complex adaptive system moves the system. Online. Anybody online want to jump in? No? Good. Anybody else in the room? Yes?
I happen to work in different schools, so I'm originally from India. I worked in the NHS for 10 years, and then I've worked in Australia now for almost 7 years.
Yep.
And I just see different teams, and one of the themes that comes to my mind is what do you perceive as the difference between a leader-centered team and team-centered leader? So what I mean by a team-centered leader is that the leader actually knows the team really well, and then does the whereas in certain parts I've seen it's the leader, and the leader says, yeah, this is what we want, this is what I want in the team, and this is what we should do. And I think that creates a lot of issues in the long term, because you're not necessarily bringing the best out, because at the end of the day, what I see is no matter who you are, what your role is in the team, it's for the purpose of delivering best care.
Fantastic. So for those who are online, it was both a question and a statement, and I don't disagree with you. The question was, the introduction was, I've lived in different cultures from India, I've been to the NHS, I'm now in Australia, and I see different things. And how does that play out? One of those is, how does it play out with a team-centred leader or a leader-centred team? And I think that and the point was made that we should be team-centred leaders, because it's best. First thing, cultures are very real and they are very different. And that's my point around understanding the environment. When I worked for Telstra, I had the privilege of buying a company called Dr. Foster, who created the Hospital Standardised Mortality Index. And they're a London-based company, so I got to be a general manager of a group of Brits from Australia. And I used to fly in, and I was a guest in a country that I was leading a company of. And that's pretty weird. And you cannot take an Australian-centred model into Britain, because the Brits love queues. The Australians like to tell you to get stuffed. These are realities, right? People in North Queensland think differently from Brisbane, so you have to adjust what you do. Cultures are very, very real, and you've got to understand them. And there's a whole thing about core belief, but we won't go there. The second part of the question was, my personal focus is to be a servant leader. I think that servant leadership is the key, personally. I think that as a job as a leader, you are there for them. Same as a clinician, you are there for your patients. And we as clinicians will actually sacrifice our families and our sleep to be there for our patients. And as a leader, we have to sacrifice our ego, our dominance, our ability to tell people what to do to be an effective leader. Having said that, remember, there is no right, there is no wrong, it depends. There is a time and a place to have a leader-centred team where the leader stands up and says, we're going over there, right? That's actually quite reasonable and quite useful. It's just when do you do it? And when do you become a servant leader? So one must have a broad range of skills. One last question, and then I think we're going to draw something. Is that right? You're going to give something away for free? Well, hey, I'm not in the draw. Last question. Thank you.
What's your experience with practice development in developing shared visions for cultures for change?
Oh, wonderful. What a great question. So one of the things that we've done here, one of the things we did on the coast was develop a team charter. And again, I apologise, my bad. Going to the web, the question was, what's my experience with practice development, with shared visioning, and people working out together? Again, to me, it's a tool, and it's a really powerful tool. The question is, does the situation warrant the tool, right? Remember back to that whole thing around recklessness and motivation and resistance. The same thing, there's consultation and then there's drive. Too much consultation is floppy, sloppy, vanilla, useless, blah, 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 going nowhere. Keep everybody happy. Why? Because I want to please everybody, because I've asked everybody their opinion and nobody agrees, and that's good because I don't have to do anything now. Oh, that's really cool. Versus drive. Now, so there is a time and a place for collaboration, for what do we stand for around here. Sometimes people actually don't know. It's a bit like, I'll bring it back to the clinical scenario, right? It is informed consent. It's all well and good to say that I will give patients informed consent about their brain tumour. If I say to them, it looks like you've got an anaplastic astrocytoma in your left parietal lobe, what would you like to do? That's a really unfair question. It's a stupid question. They actually have come to me to tell them what should be done. Now, I can say to them, we've got two choices. I can either be really aggressive and give you a beautiful MRI and take all of that tumour out and risk you never walking again, or I can be less invasive and you'll walk again, but you might not live as long. What information would you like to know? Well, I'd like to know what the difference in living time is, please. Here's the answer. Now what would you like to do? That's a very fair question. What would you prefer, risk or benefit? That's a fair question. So be really careful with the question that we ask people. When we're going to a collaborative approach, you can't ask people questions that they can't answer. And I well remember when I started on the Gold Coast, I'm sorry to keep telling these stories, and I was with the group of urologists. The first question I said to them, what's your vision for urology? Right? Now, the poor buggers had no idea. They'd never visioned anything in their life. That was a cue. I have to help them to learn to vision. I have to help them to learn to see what things could be like in 5 years' time, because they're just doing what everybody else is doing. So, it's a tool. The trick with all tools is to know when to use them and when to use another tool. That's why you've got to understand the environment, understand the literature, understand the frameworks, and then know how and when to apply them. Thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate it. You've been wonderful. Thank you.
Personally, one for you. So just on behalf of the college, thank you very much. And we do have a business card draw for those that saw the little sign at the front. So,
all right, who loves me? I'll let I haven't got my glasses.
Okay. Michelle Watson. Hey. There you go. Thank you. Okay, thank you all very much for coming out early this morning. There are a few more events through the college coming up in the next couple of months with the Chief Health Officer's report and the Deputy Director General, John Wakefield. But everybody that registered will receive that via email. All right, thank you all very much.